The M16 is the definitive American Cold War rifle. Born out of America's desire for a new combat rifle, this 5.56mm gas-operated firearm became an icon of the US military and its power in the second half of the 20th century. Serving in combat across the world, from the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of the Middle East, the M16 is battle-proven and remains steadfast in service even today. Weighing in at just over 6 pounds and with a length of just under 40 inches, it fires between 700 and 800 rounds of 5.56mm per minute. Coupled with an effective range of 800 meters and a muzzle velocity of 960 meters per second, it is a truly fearsome weapon. The M16's story begins in 1938 at Aberdeen Proving Grounds Ballistic Research Laboratories, where researchers were studying the lethality of ammunition types and the realities of the modern battlefield. By 1952, these studies had led the researchers to the conclusion that rifle ranges rarely exceeded 500 yards and that rifle fire was most effective at 120 yards or less. Another study compounding these conclusions also found that most kills happened at less than 100 yards, soldiers only aimed the first of their shots, and that small caliber ammunition was most effective for this. Therefore, it was concluded that going forward, effective rifles must fire high velocity, small caliber rounds and at a high fire rate. In the meantime, the US was involved in a war in Korea and being woefully outgunned. Still relying on World War II relics such as the M1 Garand and the M3 Grease Gun, they were facing the fearsome AK-47, a weapon firing far faster and more effective than anything the US had in their arsenal. The need for an automatic firing, intermediate cartridge firearm became apparent. In 1956, the US Army began testing several rifles to replace the M1 Garand. Amongst these was a latecomer to the competition, Armalite with their AR-10, a weapon looking and handling starkly different than any other submitted to the Army. However, the US would choose to go with the established manufacturer Springfield Armory's T-44, which would ultimately become the M14. Unfortunately, the M14's battle reports indicated that it was uncontrollable in full auto, and soldiers couldn't carry enough ammo to maintain fire superiority over the AK-47. Thus, the Army would have to reconsider. In 1957, Armalite submits the AR-15, a scaled-down version of the AR-10, firing the smaller 5.56mm cartridge. But despite outperforming the M14 and another rifle from Remington, the Army snubbed the AR-15 due to its unconventional design and construction, and Armalite eventually sold the rights to the design to Colt in 1959. Colt began aggressively marketing the rifle, citing its accuracy, low recoil, modern design, and supposed low maintenance and self-cleaning capabilities. In 1962, the Department of Defense purchased 1,000 AR-15s and sent them to Vietnam for field testing, where it received glowing praise, leading to the Army and Air Force placing orders for their own rifles, designated as the M16E1 and M16 respectively, beginning service in 1964. As the US's involvement in Vietnam became larger and larger, the government placed huge orders for the AR-15, officially designating it the M16A1 in 1967. This new rifle, however, was not received well. Still seen as underpowered with its smaller cartridge and fiberglass construction, the rifle gained a poor reputation, but much more unforgivable was the sheer number of jams and stoppages, especially in combat. It was reported that half of all M16A1s experienced some kind of extraction failure in the field, leading to heavy casualties. Something had to be done. It was found that the gunpowder used was leading to these extraction failures, along with a different pressure curve, meaning operating parts were under much more strain. Colt's marketing of the rifle as self-cleaning created a lack of cleaning supplies and adequate training on maintenance, and in an effort to cut costs, the rifle was not initially chromium plated on the barrel bore and bolt group, making the parts much more prone to damage. By 1970, different powder was introduced that produced much less residue in the gun action. The barrel, chamber, and bore were chrome-lined to improve sturdiness. Cleaning kits were issued, better training programs developed, and 30-round mags introduced to replace old 20-round ones. These changes dramatically improved not only the weapon, but also its reputation. Faith in the platform restored, the rifle would go on to become an icon of the Vietnam War, and the US military as a whole. As time progressed, new variants of the M16 were developed and put into service. Adopted in 1982, the M16A2 featured a heavier barrel, better rifling, improved rear sights, a rounded handguard, and most importantly, a 3-round burst of automatic fire in order to conserve ammunition. The A2 would slowly phase out the A1 by 2000. In 1994, the M16's little brother, the M4, would be developed and adopted by the US military. It's essentially a scaled-down M16A2, with a shortened barrel, collapsible stock, and detachable carrying handle. 2 years later, the more rare M16A3 was adopted solely by the Navy, the only difference from the A2 being its full auto capability. The final variant of the M16, the M16A4, was adopted by the US military in 1997 and featured a removable carrying handle and Picatinny rails for rail-mounted attachments, such as optics, lasers, and foregrips. Wherever the US military has gone over the last 60 years, the M16 has followed. Be it in the hands of draftees in the jungles of Vietnam, soldiers on their first combat deployment in Iraq, or hardened veterans in Afghanistan, the M16 has defended America valiantly, and remains doing so in some capacity today. More recently, the US has phased out the M16 in favor of the M4 and its variants, along with Sig Sauer's X-M7, adopted by the Army in 2022. Despite the problems and bad reputation it initially had, the M16 platform grew into a military icon, defying those that snubbed it and outperforming its competition for decades.